The young man, exhausted, collapsed to the ground beneath the shade of a great tree. Slowly lifting his head, he glanced toward the others nearby. When he asked if they had come to an agreement, one of them admitted, not really. Another added that he had listened to her but still needed more time to think things through. The companion beside him agreed, saying she may have spoken too harshly. Relieved, the young man smiled and said it was good they were beginning to soften. He was glad to hear it, as he hoped everything could be settled by tomorrow. The group reflected on their earlier discussions. When asked if they had reached any definite conclusion, the answer was simple, nope. They admitted they had not thought deeply enough about it yet. The young man pointed out that it was fine to take time, but they should at least consider the matter carefully, even if they could not decide right away. He explained that as long as they did not reject the possibility outright, there was still room for hope. One of the women responded with a smile, saying she would think about it more and do her best to give him an answer tomorrow. He accepted this, though he emphasized that if they were truly uncertain, it was better to give no answer at all rather than decide in haste. What mattered most was their genuine conviction. Before parting, he mentioned that he needed to speak with someone else, Bowen, so he excused himself. As he walked away, he waved and reminded them, "See you tomorrow morning. Try not to be late." The young man entered a room, opening the door quietly. Inside, a large man stirred awake with a yawn, surprised to see him so early. "It's morning already?" the man asked, rubbing his eyes. The visitor explained that he had come by to check in, knowing his companion had much work to do that day. He mentioned the previous night, saying that he was glad for the man's help and understanding. With a smile, the larger man nodded, replying, "Of course, I understand." Before leaving, the young man paused and said there was something important to discuss, news about Atron. The larger man, now serious, asked if it was about the rebel kingdom. The visitor confirmed it, explaining that he had obtained new information from the highest command. When asked what that meant, he revealed the truth: they were planning to move forward with their military operation against Atron. The larger man listened carefully, acknowledging that Atron might not pose a problem for the empire itself, but the kingdom had influence over the northern tribes, making them a potential threat. The young man agreed, explaining that the rebels would not stand idle forever. Eventually, they would move, and preparations had to be made. He emphasized the importance of planning, especially in organizing the military forces, establishing strategies, and preparing their men for battle. The older warrior asked plainly who would lead such an effort, himself or the young man standing before him. Without hesitation, the visitor answered, "You." At first shocked, the larger man's eyes widened, but the youth continued firmly. He insisted that Bowen was the one most suited for the task. "You know the northern tribes better than anyone," he reasoned, "and your presence would be invaluable." With that, he placed before him the responsibility of commanding the northern front when the time came. The young man grew serious and admitted that he had once planned to execute Bowen himself. Bowen, caught off guard, stared at him in shock. The youth continued, revealing that he had considered killing him after the Hellfire battle, believing it was necessary. Bowen demanded to know if he had truly carried such intent all this time. With a sigh, he leaned back, half amused and half weary, remarking on how difficult it was to restrain himself under such circumstances. "It's just been sitting there," he confessed. He explained that it had taken him a long time to manage and suppress the dangerous power coursing through his body. It had not been easy. As he spoke, a dark magical circle glimmered into existence, proof of the strain he had endured. But now, after much inner struggle, he declared that he had reached a conclusion. Bowen dropped heavily into his chair, stunned, and muttered, "I don't believe it, it's over." The young man admitted with a bitter smile that, yes, the thought of killing Bowen had been real. But now, after much turmoil, he had chosen a different path. "It's over," he declared firmly. His gaze hardened with resolve, and he added that it was time to shift focus back to what truly mattered. As the sun set beyond the horizon, he prepared himself for the next stage. "It's time to go again," he thought, determined to face the challenges awaiting him. The tall tower loomed over the grounds where students and professors gathered in groups. Some chatted idly, while others prepared for the day's activities. From the crowd, someone asked aloud, "Where's Nerys?" At that moment, footsteps approached, drawing everyone's attention. As the students gathered, one of them explained the upcoming field trip. The group would be visiting a territory known as Mourned, and arrangements had already been made. With a smile, the young man reminded Nerys that she had offered to let them use her estate. Nerys confirmed it proudly. She had already spoken with her family, and everything was prepared. This surprised the others, who exclaimed at how quickly she had arranged it. The young man chuckled, admitting that he had only been joking when he first mentioned using her house. He had not expected her to follow through so seriously. Nerys brushed it off, saying that her family estate was vast and more than suitable for hosting everyone. The others could only marvel. "She's too damn rich," one muttered, while another remarked that they had never realized she was so well off. Nerys then revealed her lineage. She was a member of the Torin family, a household with deep roots and influence. Though her parents were not currently in residence, the estate was still fully maintained, and she assured them that everything was in order for their stay. The narrative shifted briefly to a stern instructor who had seen countless students come and go. His years of service had hardened him, but he still carried the weight of responsibility. Though only a few ever rose to greatness, he believed that training them was never in vain. Back among the students, a question arose. One asked why they were being sent to Morin at all. Wasn't it dangerous? The concern centered on the possibility of unrest and the difficulty of protecting everyone. Another countered sharply, insisting that being a soldier was not merely about fighting wars. Soldiers, he argued, served many functions, and even nobles needed to experience the hardships of travel and survival. Nerys agreed, adding that there was truth in that statement. Soldiers were the backbone of order, and nobles had to understand the reality that went beyond luxurious halls. The debate grew more heated. One student shouted back, accusing nobles of being detached from the struggles of commoners, claiming that many had no idea what the world outside their estates was truly like. Nerys responded coolly, insisting there was a reason noble families had endured for generations. Their duty was to govern and provide stability, even if others failed to see it. The young noble who argued against her refused to relent, declaring that nobles only believed themselves superior while the rest of the people carried the real burdens. The heated argument pressed on. The young noble, red with frustration, accused Nerys of living in comfort while others suffered. He asked if she had ever truly experienced hunger, or if she had ever worried about how to feed herself day after day. He claimed that nobles like her could never understand what it meant to struggle for survival. Nerys' eyes narrowed. She challenged him, asking if he was implying that commoners were somehow more important than nobles. The young man snapped back, declaring that her upbringing had blinded her to the pain ordinary people endured. For what? She asked sharply. Always being hungry. The boy stood firm, insisting that countless people lived in misery, toiling endlessly just to survive, while nobles ignored their suffering. You're a mage, he spat, but you're also a noble. And in my eyes, that makes you a fool. The tension thickened in the air as the others nearby turned to watch. What's going on? Someone asked quietly. At that moment, another student approached, her expression firm as she prepared to intervene. The sharp exchange between Nerys and the young noble was interrupted when another student stepped closer. Sensing the tension, she asked what was going on. The boy forced a smile and brushed it off, claiming that nothing major had happened, that they were only discussing. The student raised a brow, unconvinced, and pressed further, asking what exactly they had been discussing. The boy faltered, clearly struggling to come up with an answer. Before the moment grew heavier, a booming voice rang out. Bowen approached with a wide grin, shouting joyfully. Vermil, his cheer broke through the tense atmosphere, shifting everyone's focus. He asked if they were excited for the trip, his enthusiasm radiating as he clapped his hand against the air. The young man confirmed, asking in turn about the others. Bowen assured him confidently, "Of course they're coming." The group gathered together near the airship, their voices overlapping with excitement and nervous chatter. When the imposing instructor appeared, however, the mood shifted at once. His sharp eyes swept over them, and his tone carried authority as he reminded them that this trip was not for leisure. It was meant to test their ability and expand their knowledge. One student hesitated, pointing out that the journey could be dangerous. The instructor didn't deny it. Instead, he confirmed that the risks were real. That was precisely the point of sending them, to face challenges and learn. Bowen, ever cheerful, tried to lighten the mood, praising the instructor's practicality. "How magnanimous of you," he joked, though his voice carried a hint of nervousness. The instructor's gaze hardened. "As long as you don't forget your purpose. Numbers are important in battle. The more you have, the less chance of disaster." His words lingered like a warning, silencing further complaints. Still, Bowen's spirit wasn't crushed. "Glad to hear you're all feeling ready," he said, clapping his hands together. Then, with a grin that tried to mask the tension, he added, "Shall we get started?" The students waited near the docking area, their conversations filled with nervous excitement. Bowen clapped his hands to gather their attention, announcing that they would begin shortly, but only once everyone had arrived. "Everyone," one of the students echoed, confused. Bowen explained that, since the academy was part of the larger empire, the event wasn't just for their class. Other groups from nearby institutions would be joining them as well. This trip was meant to strengthen ties and foster healthy competition. Almost on cue, a shout rang out. "Hal and Ali over here!" Two figures approached, both carrying themselves with the kind of authority that drew immediate attention. Bowen's cheerful expression faltered the moment he recognized them. His smile stiffened, his eyes darkened, and his jaw tightened as he muttered under his breath. God damn it! Standing beside him, Alia wore the same strained look, as if the sight of the newcomers was the last thing either of them wanted. The atmosphere grew tense as two figures approached, their dark aura making the others uneasy. Bowen and Alia's expression soared immediately, clearly displeased with the newcomers' presence. The newcomers themselves stood confidently, their grim energy radiating around them. Bowen muttered under his breath, "What are they doing here?" The group of students shifted uncomfortably, confused by the sudden tension. One of the men explained that they were to join the field trip as well. It wasn't optional. Bowen raised an eyebrow, displeased but not surprised. "So, it's an order," he remarked quietly. The instructors confirmed. The field trip would proceed and everyone would participate, whether they liked it or not. Bowen's frown deepened. He could already sense that this journey would not be as simple as a training exercise. The tension hung heavy until Bowen finally let out a long breath. With a forced grin, he decided to move things along. "Very well," he said, "so long as we're all here, let's get this trip started." One of the other instructors nodded firmly, stating that he could work with that. Bowen clapped his hands together, sealing the matter. "Good, then it's settled. We'll depart immediately." The instructors announced that the field trip would last 2 weeks. It was designed to be a challenge, a true test of the students' endurance and adaptability. For many of the young mages, this would be their first time experiencing such conditions outside the academy walls. Some whispered nervously, realizing the difficulty of what awaited them. Bowen, however, was clear the trip was not meant to coddle them. There would be no hand-holding, no easy comforts, and no shortcuts. Any complaints would be theirs to swallow. And so, with their belongings packed, the group departed the city gates and began their long journey across the open road. "Any questions?" Bowen asked flatly. The students exchanged awkward glances, clearly overwhelmed by the idea of surviving outside the academy walls for 2 whole weeks. None of them raised their hands. The silence lingered until one of the younger students whispered nervously, "Should I have brought extra underwear?" The journey began. Under the fading glow of sunset, the group walked steadily across the plains, their shadows stretching long behind them. The once familiar safety of the city quickly shrank into the distance. As night fell, the first real challenge arrived, setting up camp. Well then, one of the instructors said, looking around at the rocky clearing, "This seems like a good place to stop. Can anyone make a fire?" Silence. Finally, one student hesitantly raised a hand. "I can." Stepping forward, he gathered dry branches, stacking them into a neat pile. With practiced precision, he channeled a bit of mana and, a bright flame burst to life, lighting up the night. The group sighed in relief as warmth and light spread through the camp. As night settled over the camp, the instructor turned his attention to Ralice, the quiet girl who had been standing silently among the others. With a firm but expectant tone, he urged her to show what she could do. Though nervous, she stepped forward, placing her hands against the ground. Mana pulsed from her fingertips, spreading across the earth. The soil trembled, rocks shifted, and under her control the terrain began to reshape itself. Before the watching group, a structure slowly rose, a sturdy hut made entirely of stone. Its walls solidified, glowing faintly with the lingering energy of her magic. The camp grew silent for a moment, stunned by her display. Whispers of admiration passed between the students, while the instructors exchanged approving nods. Ralice had not only proven her strength, but also provided the group with the shelter they desperately needed. As the fire crackled in the center of camp, the instructor's stern eyes softened slightly. He nodded toward Isabel, acknowledging her work. He explained that the stone hut she had raised wasn't just shelter. It also served as a sturdy defensive structure. Its walls could block not only the wind and rain but also physical attacks and even some forms of magic. Isabel's face lit up with pride at the praise. She had always struggled with confidence, but hearing such words made her heart swell. Around the fire, the other students leaned closer, their curiosity growing. The conversation soon shifted when Lee asked the cat-eared girl about her own magical specialty. She sat confidently, her mischievous eyes glinting in the firelight. With a smirk, she admitted that her magic was a bit unusual, focused on illusions, tricks, and disorienting opponents. Though it wasn't the most destructive, she declared that in the right hands, illusions could turn the tide of a battle. As she spoke, sparks from the campfire rose into the night sky, the students realizing that each of them carried skills that could prove vital for the journey ahead. The campfire glowed warmly as the group continued their conversation. One of the students leaned forward, explaining, "Yeah, student or mercenary, the principle's the same. You gain experience much faster." Across the fire, another called out, "Oliver." Oliver, sitting with his arms around his knees, admitted, "I had a good teacher." His words drew curious glances. "You did? Who?" someone asked. Oliver smiled faintly. "I thought I'd ask." The response made another laugh. "Haha, not a bad move." A different student added, "There's a lot of opportunities out there while we're still young. The world is rich." Oliver's eyes shone with determination as he declared, "Yeah, in the end I'll become great." One of his companions chuckled, shaking their head. "How much more dramatic do you plan to get?" "I can't help it," Oliver insisted, his tone rising with emotion. "My heart gets big whenever I imagine the future I want." From her spot by the flames, a silver-haired student finally spoke, her voice steady and serious. "Body is difficult. Attainment is something that requires one's own dedication." The fire crackled softly and silence fell for a moment as everyone reflected on the weight of her words. The stern man stepped closer to the fire, his voice cutting through the night. He demanded, "Just how much longer are you kids planning to waste your time idling around?" The knight beside the flames didn't flinch. Instead, he replied coolly, declaring that he would have them know this was a part of knightly tradition. Another man spoke firmly in defense of his companions. "Don't talk about my students like that," he said, his tone sharp. The first man clenched his fists, grunting in frustration though he held his tongue. From the opposite side, the red-haired woman intervened. "Gillis," she said quietly but firmly, "cool down. Don't do this now." The large, broad knight seated nearby chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. He said that he typically dozed off after a meal, but admitted it would be difficult to get through the night this time. The fire flickered between them, reflecting both tension and camaraderie among the group. The heavyset knight waved his hand dismissively and said, "But enough of that talk." With a grin, he held up a steaming plate and asked, "Shall we eat?" The food gleamed under the firelight, rich and plentiful. One of the younger members of the group blinked in surprise. "Actually, I didn't expect you were making all that," he admitted. Elsewhere, near the rune shelter, the red-haired woman sat quietly by the flames. The night air was calm until footsteps approached. Step, step, a gentle knock echoed against the stone. The purple-cloaked man leaned in, his voice low but clear. My, you've got yourself a good spot." The woman turned her head slightly and responded dryly, "Is there a reason you'd suddenly appear tonight to engage me in talk?" The red-haired woman stepped outside, her sharp green eyes glinting in the moonlight. She walked calmly, her boots crunching against the earth with every step. This should be far enough, she muttered to herself, her tone cool and steady. She glanced back at the rune shelter, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. I don't need anyone nosing around while I work, she added. Raising her hand, a faint glow began to gather at her fingertips. Slowly, green energy swirled around her palm before spilling onto the ground. Roots cracked through the soil, twisting and curling as life itself obeyed her call. With a low hum, vines erupted outward, sprouting, unfurling, and coiling up into the night air. The woman's magic pulsed stronger, and the ground cracked open. From the soil, a towering figure of roots and vines rose, its glowing green eyes burning with unnatural life. Move, she commanded, her voice steady and laced with power. The creature obeyed, its wooden limbs creaking as it straightened to its full height. Its eyes locked onto her, a deep rumble escaping its chest. What is this location? It demanded. She crossed her arms unshaken. We're near Barossa Ridge, a windswept, treacherous place. The creature's gaze narrowed. I see then this area is not under protection. Exactly, she replied sharply, which is why we can talk freely, without interference. Its glowing eyes flickered with recognition, and it leaned closer. We've been tracking your movements. What has happened? She smirked, brushing a strand of red hair behind her ear. The subject that you instructed me to monitor has now become interesting. The monster's expression darkened, shadows curling around its form. Out with it, it growled. The towering creature loomed over her, its glowing eyes narrowing as its voice slithered through the night air. Are you a hired household mage of House Torin? It asked, suspicion dripping from every word. The woman's expression hardened, but she said nothing. The creature's gaze sharpened as it pressed further. I recall you speaking with the nobles at the Goldsheath estate. Was it manipulation? Her jaw clenched. Finally, she answered, manipulated. The creature tilted its head, its eyes glowing brighter as realization struck. Vermil Lumic, was it? The woman's silence was all the confirmation it needed. Tell me everything, the creature commanded, its voice echoing like the rustle of dead leaves. The night grew colder, the shadows thickening around them as the weight of secrets pressed heavily on the air. A knock echoed softly against the stone. Lihan's voice carried through the silence as he reminded the others not to let their guard down. He stepped outside and reminded everyone that there should be no distractions during this time. Determination filled his eyes as he thought to himself that this was his chance, and he intended to take advantage of it while everyone else was distracted and focused on other things. Moving quietly, Lihan slipped away from the campfire and disappeared into the night. His footsteps were soft against the grass as he distanced himself from the others. From the shadows, the red-haired woman observed him. She noted that it was a bit unsettling to see how often he went off on his own, always wandering off as if chasing secrets unseen by the rest. At last, Lihan finally left the academy's quarters behind and reached the outskirts of town. He muttered to himself that it turned out to be a smoother trip than he had expected. Far away in the shadows, Aldred's glowing green eyes pierced the night. His voice carried with weight as he began to speak. He explained that they had been traveling, searching, and now they stood at last in this place. He reminded her not to feel weighed down by unease, for even if the situation seemed grim, there was always a flicker of possibility. The red-haired woman, steadfast and unyielding, responded firmly that she was not alone. She declared that she traveled with her beliefs and convictions, carrying them as shields in this endless battle. Aldred's gaze deepened, his presence pressing against the night like an ancient shadow. Aldred's gaze burned as he accused her of carrying the lamp of borrowed power, claiming her strength was not truly her own. The woman shook her head, refusing his claim. She declared that it was not as he believed. Her strength did not come from borrowed flames. It came from her own spirit, her own will. Aldred scoffed, his expression twisting with disdain. He taunted her, saying she had been brainwashed for all this time. His dark energy coiled like serpents as he struck out, calling her nothing more than a servant bound by chains she could not see. She held her ground even as his words cut deep. He reminded her that there was no escaping the truth, that she had allowed herself to be bound and tricked. His voice thundered that she would always be what he claimed unless she broke free. He raised his voice further, demanding to know how long she would continue playing her false role. His tone was sharp, merciless, daring her to answer. The silence between them grew heavy until she finally admitted that his words had struck deep. He smirked at her answer, finding it satisfactory. He told her that now, through pain and acknowledgement, she could prove her true worth. He reminded her that while she struggled with doubt, he would patiently wait until she finally embraced her destiny. But she did not bend to his will. Standing tall, she declared that her strength was her own, and that she would continue to fight in her own way, no matter how much he tried to twist her resolve. He let out a disappointed hiss, the night air chilling as he loomed over her. To him, her refusal was proof of weakness. Yet he pressed further, asking if there was truly nothing she desired, nothing at all that he could offer to sway her heart. Her response was steady, she needed nothing from him. He narrowed his glowing eyes, but a faint smile curved at his lips. He remarked that perhaps she did not need anything now, but maybe one day she would. With a wave of his hand, he told her to continue her path. He warned that the longer she denied the truth, the heavier the burden would become, and in time, she would eventually turn to him willingly. He told her he could not possibly understand mortals, nor why they so stubbornly clung to their convictions. To him, their beliefs were fleeting, fragile things that shifted like the wind. He admitted openly that he could never truly comprehend such thinking. She lowered her gaze, pausing in silence before answering. She confessed that while she could not speak for others, what she desired for herself was clear. That made him tilt his head, intrigued, his glowing eyes narrowing with curiosity. She straightened her stance, her voice firm as she declared that what she wanted was to become stronger than anyone else, to surpass the weaknesses of her own limits. He blinked at her words, then let out a deep, unsettling chuckle. He called her ambition fitting, harsh yet pure. To him, it was the kind of desire that could shape the world itself. Still, he added that it was also the mark of one destined to face hardship, for such a path would demand sacrifice, pain, and an unshakable resolve. She did not flinch, even under the weight of his words. Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. He gave a slow nod, remarking that at least her desire was clear. He found it interesting, almost refreshing, that she sought not wealth nor comfort, nor fleeting pleasure, but true strength above all else. She lifted her chin, her voice steady as she declared that her resolve was not built on shallow desires but on the strength to rise above them. The dark figure gave a low growl, his form flickering like smoke before he began to fade back into the night, his parting words echoing that the path to true power lay open before her. As the last trace of his presence dissolved into the air, the night grew silent again. But that silence did not last. A feral growl broke through the stillness. From the shadows, another presence stirred, its hunger evident. Meanwhile, a young man in a blue cloak had been watching from a distance. His hand ignited with fiery energy as he prepared his weapon, the flames dancing along the steel with dangerous heat. He launched forward in an instant, his blade cutting through the darkness in a blazing arc, the air crackling with the sound of fire meeting night. The clash illuminated the battlefield, her resolve standing against shadow, and his fiery determination carving a path forward. The young man exhaled heavily as he sat down on the rocky slope, the moonlight washing over him in silver. His body ached, but he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. A familiar voice called his name. Turning his head, he saw Lee approaching. His expression hardened slightly as he asked if Lee had been following him all this time. Lee admitted it without hesitation, pointing out that he had been shadowing him to ensure he didn't collapse while chasing monsters. The young man rubbed his forehead, frustration creeping into his voice as he asked if Lee had truly been keeping watch over him like some overbearing guardian. Lee crossed his arms casually, stating that it wasn't so much about guardianship as it was about ensuring he didn't get himself killed. The young man sighed and muttered that he should never have expected otherwise from Lee. He struck a match, letting the flicker of flame light his cigarette, and inhaled deeply. Lee tilted his head and smirked, remarking that despite everything, the young man always found a way to complain about the care he received. The young man blew out smoke slowly, muttering that Lee was far too persistent for his own good. Lee only smiled at that, as if persistence was the very quality that defined him. The young man leaned back, stretching his sore arms as he admitted to Lee that he still needed to train more. His body was battered, but the night's battles had taught him plenty. Lee plopped down onto the grass beside him, remarking that the fights had been more intense than expected. The young man nodded in agreement, pointing out the bright red flowers blooming nearby. He mentioned that they were useful ingredients for potions and antidotes. Lee raised an eyebrow and leaned closer, asking if the flowers were truly valuable. The young man explained that while the blossoms could be useful, touching them carelessly could cause irritation or hallucinations. He warned that such herbs should be handled with proper preparation. Lee chuckled, standing up and brushing off his hands. He said he'd leave that kind of delicate work to him, admitting that his own talents didn't lie in herb gathering. The young man sighed softly, saying it had been a long night. Lee tilted his head toward the fallen monster nearby, casually suggesting they salvage the beast's leftover parts before dawn. The young man smirked faintly and agreed, remarking that collecting spoils was the least they could do after all that effort. As the two worked under the fading moonlight, the eastern horizon began to brighten. Gentle hues of orange and pink stretched across the sky, signaling the arrival of dawn. As dawn fully broke, the young man sat by the small campfire, his posture relaxed yet weary from the long night. He yawned deeply, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes as the warmth of the flames softened the chill of morning air. Across from him, the red-haired elf kept her gaze steady on the horizon, arms loosely crossed. The silence between them was broken when he asked if anything interesting had happened while she had been on watch. She shook her head, her tone calm. She reported that the night had passed quietly, nothing more than a dull routine beneath the stars. He chuckled faintly, agreeing that it had been peaceful, perhaps too peaceful for his taste. The elf tilted her head slightly, considering him for a long moment before speaking again. "I have a question," she finally said. His eyes shifted toward her, curiosity sparking. "What is it?" he asked. She leaned forward slightly, her expression sharp. "When you fought that middle-tier monster last night," she began, "why didn't you transform and use your true power as you did before?" Her words lingered in the morning air, carrying both curiosity and a subtle weight of expectation. The elf's sharp question hung in the air, but the young man only gave a wry smile. He admitted it wasn't hesitation or fear that kept him from using his transformation. It was simply that his control was still incomplete. Relying on that power recklessly would cause more trouble than it solved. She studied him in silence for a moment, her green eyes narrowing. "So that's it," she murmured. "You still don't have full command over that form." "Not yet," he confessed, "but I'm working on it." She leaned back against the stone ruin, arms folding loosely over her chest. "It was pretty impressive even without it," she admitted at last, though her tone carried the faintest edge of teasing. He chuckled. "Should I take that as praise?" Don't get ahead of yourself, she replied with a faint smile, rising to her feet. She stretched, her long limbs unfolding as the first full rays of dawn painted the sky in soft gold. We still need to keep moving. The monsters won't wait for us to be ready. He nodded, pushing himself up.
Yeah.
Just give me a few more minutes to pack everything. With a final stretch, the elf strode away from the fire pit, her hair catching the early light as she jogged a short distance ahead. From behind, a voice suddenly called out. Hey, he turned surprised, just in time to see their other companion step into view with a mischievous grin. Lee nearly jumped when Isabel suddenly popped into his view with her usual boundless energy. Good lord, can't she at least announce herself first? He thought in irritation, pressing a hand to his chest. The young girl just smirked. She's not the type, she replied bluntly. Lee adjusted his glasses and gave her a side glance. Did Isabel already head off to bed? He asked. Maybe, the girl answered with a shrug, but she was still grumbling about tactics not too long ago. Lee sighed. Well, having to deal with me is tiring. That's what you're saying, huh? The girl shot back with a teasing grin. You're not the easiest to deal with either. Lee chuckled, shaking his head. I am not the easiest, I'll admit. Exactly, she said, pointing a finger at him. Which is why you should work those legs of yours, old man. Want to join? Lee raised a brow. Join what exactly? The girl stretched, her tail swishing with mischief before darting off with a playful laugh. Come on, geezer, time for a lesson. Isabel's voice rang out, bright and playful, as she leaned over the edge of the ruin. Time for a lesson, she announced with her usual excitement. Below, Aldeon looked up in surprise, blinking at the girl. Isabel, he muttered, half in disbelief. She dropped down with a light tap against the stone floor. Aldeon quickly straightened, holding up his hands as if to assure her. He was getting up, he was setting up, he insisted. There, he said aloud, almost to himself, steadying his posture. But then a sharp pang tore through his side. His hand pressed against his ribs, and his expression twisted with pain. Damn it, he hissed under his breath. When his palm came away, it revealed the smear of blood across his waist. His injury was worse than he thought. I should have been more careful, he admitted quietly, frustration heavy in his voice. The group walked together across a field, and one of them asked if they were really just going to walk into the monastery. Another confirmed with a simple yeah. A man in a suit with a yellow tie smiled and told them to be grateful, adding that there was a surprise waiting. Curious, someone asked what he meant, and he replied to just watch and see. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble, startling everyone as they struggled to keep balance. One shouted in shock, thinking it was an earthquake, but the man clarified that it wasn't. At that moment, the ground burst open violently. A large creature suddenly burst out from the ground, roaring fiercely. The man in the suit introduced it as a chopper and explained that they could be used to train soldiers because of their durable hides and relentless nature. The creature growled menacingly as he continued speaking. Another person commented not to look at them, while others judged the creature's strength, some saying it looked simple, some unimpressive, and some admitting it wasn't particularly strong. One asked if it at least had meat, but another replied they weren't good for eating. Meanwhile, the creature stabbed repeatedly into the ground with its sharp claws. The man explained that their tough hides made them ideal opponents for training, but warned that they wouldn't stop attacking until their target was dead, showing how dangerous they were. The man struck the creature with a powerful blow, sending it crashing into the ground. He declared that it could no longer move. One of the students asked how fast it was, and he replied that it depended on the chopper. Another asked how tough its hide was, and he answered not that tough. Then, facing the group, he asked if there were any more questions. The creature suddenly stabbed its claws into the ground again, showing it was still dangerous. The man smiled and said, Good, who wants to go first? One of the students stepped forward, admitting he just had to fight the monster. The others confirmed his decision, and he prepared himself by poking at the ground and declaring it was time to get started. He reminded himself to make sure the monster had no time to react, then unleashed a fairy attack, shouting as flames erupted. Another student, watching from the side, pointed out that he had told him to make it so the monster couldn't move. The student fighting replied that it was easier said than done before a loud explosion followed. The student leapt into the air as the monster burst upward from the ground. The beast tried to evade by leaping itself, but the student pursued it closely, landing another fairy attack with a powerful explosion that struck its body. After landing, he faced the monster again as it growled at him. He admitted he had lost track of its movements and realized he didn't have enough experience fighting tougher opponents. The others watched from a distance, one of them commenting on his performance, while another noted that the monster still wanted to continue the fight. One of the students grew frustrated, yelling at another for missing an attack and comparing it to catching a butterfly. The red-haired student shouted back in anger, telling her not to compare him to an insect. Another student stepped forward, demonstrating his skill with a fiery strike that impressed the group. The others complimented his control, with one remarking that he could have simply finished the fight by himself. A silver-haired girl pointed out that showing off wasn't necessary, but he explained it was called practice and reminded them that training was the point. He emphasized that if they couldn't handle a beast like this, they wouldn't be ready for stronger enemies. Another student nodded, agreeing with his reasoning. The instructor explained his philosophy, saying that with persistence he had achieved results, even if they were not perfect. He emphasized that improvement came with steady practice, and that students shouldn't wait for the right moment but act with what they had now. The silver-haired girl acknowledged this, while another student looked doubtful. One of the red-haired students muttered in annoyance, while another admitted it felt a bit unfair. The instructor, however, reminded them that adversity was part of growth. He looked over the group and, satisfied with their reactions, thought to himself that it was perfect. The silver-haired girl summoned her magic, forming a glowing blue spear in her hand. With precision, she hurled it through the air, and the spear flew straight and fast, piercing the beast cleanly. After the strike, she walked away calmly, saying that was how things should be done. The group watched as the girl returned after her precise strike, and one of her classmates praised her for taking the beast down in a single shot. The instructor commended the entire group for their teamwork, noting their success. However, he reminded them that strength should be balanced with cooperation and not used recklessly. Another student acknowledged the advice, and the red-haired girl nodded in agreement, admitting that it was her turn next. The blue-scarfed girl stretched confidently, declaring that she was ready. The scene shifted to the previous night. A girl sat on a rock, keeping watch, noting that there should not be any trouble and that she could handle things if needed. She suddenly noticed one of her companions walking away from the camp and questioned where he was going. Another teammate also spotted him and grew confused, pointing out that they were supposed to stay together at night. She wondered aloud why he was wandering off, puzzled by his behavior, and then questioned if he was perhaps rushing away from a duel. The boy crouched in the dark, flipping through a book as he thought about the creatures in the area. He admitted to himself that he did not know how to fight except by reading from books. Looking at a page with an of a beast and nearby plants, he commented that the knowledge made it easier to survive, even if it was just for a little while longer. He struck the ground, causing a faint shine, but struggled as he admitted the task was too heavy. Finally, he activated a glowing rune across his body, which made the load more manageable. With relief, he said it was much better. From nearby, another teammate noticed him and, with a faint smile, muttered for him to carry on. The boy stood determined, his eyes sharp as he thought about his goal. He reached out, brushing his hand against a flower, and told himself he needed to be strong. With a glowing sword in one hand and a radiant shield in the other, he declared that he had to become strong enough to kill his target. Isabel imagined her brother's face in her mind as she remembered his words. With determination, she told herself to stay strong. She brushed her hand across a flower and focused, knowing she had to grow stronger. Holding a glowing sword and shield, she steadied herself, ready for battle. The ground cracked and shook as she stood firm, her sharp eyes burning with resolve. Isabel burst forward with speed, clashing against the beast in front of her. Her eyes locked with its feral glare as she lunged, shield raised and sword glowing. With a fierce cry, she struck, forcing the creature back. The ground shook from the impact as her shield absorbed the blow. She countered with a swift slice, her movements sharp and precise, but the beast roared and retaliated, its strength immense. Each clash sent sparks flying, the battle testing every ounce of Isabel's determination and skill. Breathing heavily, Isabel stood over the fallen beast, her sword still glowing faintly in her grip. Sweat trickled down her face as her chest rose and fell in exhaustion, but her eyes stayed sharp, focused on the now lifeless creature at her feet. The battlefield grew silent, the only sound her ragged breaths echoing through the still air. She allowed herself a brief moment of relief, lowering her weapon slightly. Just as calm began to settle in, Isabel's expression shifted. Something unexpected caught her eye. Narrowing her gaze, she muttered "What?" as her guard instinctively rose again. A group stood together under the clear sky, their attention on Isabel. One of them asked if something was wrong, but Isabel brushed it off, saying it was nothing and that they needed to move on. A man adjusted his glasses, commenting that she looked like she had seen a ghost. Another companion noted that she seemed troubled. A red-haired man then spoke up, mentioning the Linwick family's mansion and how it was crawling with mercenaries. He warned that it would not be easy to break in. With that, he turned to the others and said it was time to head out, as they had a long road ahead of them. Another man reminded Isabel to think carefully about what she had sensed earlier, warning her not to ignore such instincts, as they could be crucial for survival. The group traveled down a dirt path, sunlight pouring over the rolling fields. Together, they pressed forward with determination. The narration shifted to one of them reflecting he needed to keep his body moving, to stay sharp. He thought back to his early days as a soldier, remembering the strict routines that had drilled discipline into him. Every moment of training had been about survival and readiness. As he walked, he noticed a patch of red flowers by the road. They reminded him of something important: the need to always remain aware of his surroundings. Soldiers couldn't afford to be careless, especially not on the battlefield. His inner voice grew firmer. He recalled how, during training, mistakes weren't just failures, they could mean death. That mindset had shaped him, and even now, marching with his companions, it was ingrained in him. The panel closed with him clutching the memory like fire, acknowledging that every step forward was one more chance to prove his resolve and face whatever dangers lay ahead. The group continued their journey along the road while one of them reflected on his past. He thought about the first time he boarded the magic train years ago, wondering if his life might have been different had he chosen another path. 2 days later, the group pressed forward on the road once more, carrying their burdens and determination with them. As they traveled, one of them wondered aloud if there might be some sign of civilization nearby. He imagined a lively village where adventurers and travelers could rest and find supplies. But his daydream was cut short when another member suddenly halted the group, sensing something unusual. Before they could process what was happening, the ground trembled violently with a deep rumble. The earth cracked open, shaking the land as dust and debris shot into the air. The group looked on in shock as something massive began to rise from beneath the ground. With a thunderous crash, the figure finally emerged, its sheer force sending waves of dust rolling outward. From the chasm, a massive creature emerged, its form twisted with roots and vines roaring as the ground quaked beneath it. One of the men, his gaze sharp and steady, identified it in a low voice: a root fiend. The monster's roar echoed across the plain, sending a chill through the group. Everyone stood ready, tension high as they faced the towering threat. A question broke the silence: could anyone handle it? Another fighter immediately stepped forward with determination, insisting he could. But before he could rush ahead, his comrade quickly stopped him, warning that it wasn't something he could take on alone. The warrior steadied himself, muttering that the beast's strength was beyond normal. Unless they had overwhelming firepower, facing it head-on would be suicide. The others braced themselves as the ground rumbled beneath the fiend's steps. Its roar split the air, shaking the battlefield. But the man's expression hardened. Something had to be done. With unshakable resolve, he declared that as long as he was standing, they would not lose. In the next instant, an explosion of energy erupted, crashing into the fiend with immense force. The others stared wide-eyed, baffled. A streak of fiery power blazed across the field, twisting and striking with overwhelming intensity. Whatever it wasn't something any of them had expected. The blazing strike smashed against the root fiend with devastating force, crackling with pure energy as it tore through the air. The warriors watched in disbelief. This wasn't the work of mere chance. Realization spread among them. What they had thought impossible was happening before their eyes. The attack was too precise, too powerful. One muttered that perhaps fate was on their side after all, while another urged everyone to stay ready. The fairy figure shot forward, leaving behind streaks of burning light. With unshakable resolve, the newcomer carved into the fiend's defenses. As the dust cleared, a voice rang out, calm, steady, and firm. This wasn't just anyone. This was a soldier. In an instant, the soldier's blazing blow landed squarely, sending the monstrous root fiend reeling backward, its body crashing and splintering under the force. The root fiend reeled from the crushing impact, its massive frame staggering under the soldier's blazing strike. Dust and splinters filled the air as the battlefield shook. The group watched with wide eyes, one of them shouting in disbelief, wondering if the monster had been finished off already. Through the haze, the soldier stood tall, calm amidst the chaos. "Are you human?" one asked in awe. The man lowered his weapon, bowing his head slightly. "My apologies. I did not expect to reveal myself here. I hope I haven't caused too much trouble." His presence radiated strength, the air around him heavy with discipline and power. That unmistakable aura left no doubt. He was no ordinary fighter. A gasp broke the silence. Someone recognized him instantly. "My father and I once saw the elite troops of the Empire. Their soldiers weren't half as fearsome as this man." Another warrior clenched his fists, voice trembling with certainty. Into the fray without hesitation. That's not just skill. That's a soldier. The armored warrior stood tall, the glow of his weapon pulsing with restrained power. Dust still lingered in the air, but his voice carried clear and steady. "Of course I did. It's my duty as a soldier." With practiced precision, he swung his weapon once more, the burning arc illuminating the battlefield as it carved through the enemy's advance. The sheer force of his strikes left even seasoned fighters frozen in awe. Among the group, one man's eyes sharpened, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he watched the soldier move. The thought rang clear in his mind, unshakable. A soldier, that's what true strength looks like. And with that, the clash between man and monster raged on, the presence of the soldier turning the tide. An onlooker watched a soldier in combat and was completely awestruck, exclaiming at how incredible the man was. Another person asked if they should help, expressing doubt that the soldier was actually winning. A more experienced companion advised everyone to stay back, explaining that soldiers typically don't appreciate interference. When asked if they had spent a lot of time around soldiers, the companion simply replied, "Unfortunately." The soldier, defiant in the face of his monstrous opponent, a root fiend, declared that it wouldn't kill him easily. His hammer glowed with immense power, leading an observer to remark that it was like he had a miniature star trapped within it. They wondered what rank a soldier had to be to wield such a weapon. The soldier, whose name was Gavin, apologized to the surrounding travelers. He hadn't expected the root fiend to be so resilient, as they were usually easier to defeat. He made sure no one had been caught in the fight. A young man told him he was incredible, and Gavin humbly thanked him, saying he was just doing his job. His partner, a woman named Jess, immediately criticized him, calling him a lout and telling him not to show off so much next time. Gavin admitted he hadn't meant to use so much energy. Jess told the young man not to be too impressed with Gavin's magic, revealing that half of it wasn't his own power but came from her imbued weapons. She introduced herself as Gavin's partner, stating she did all the imbuements on his weapons and was essentially his battery. She pointed out that he had nearly drained all the magic from her runes while barely using any of his own power. Gavin defended himself, saying his magic wasn't suited for that kind of fight, and that this wasn't the place to discuss it, offering to cover her dinner instead. He then apologized again for the interruption and told the travelers they were free to continue on their way. The young man asked Jess how many imbued items Gavin had. She explained that she had imbued every piece of his armor, and that there were too many to count on his hammer, all optimized for minimal energy waste, which Gavin still managed to drain. Wishing them well and telling them to take care. when a sudden and violent tremor interrupted him. Someone shouted in alarm, wondering what was happening in the plains. Another root fiend had appeared, confusing everyone since one had just been killed. To their horror, they realized there were 2 more root fiends, which must have been awakened by the previous fight. Gavin urgently told Jess to get the civilians to safety, but she replied that she couldn't because she was nearly out of energy. He then turned to the travelers' professors and asked their ranks. They identified themselves as 2 rank 4s, a rank 3, and a rank 2, but clarified that their students weren't prepared for such a fight. One professor proposed that their group could handle one fiend if Gavin handled the other. Gavin understood the plan and told them to just focus on holding their fiend off for now, promising they would handle theirs and provide backup immediately after. He then gave a firm order to all the students to stay back and not engage no matter what, even if the adults were in trouble. After ensuring they understood, he asked his fellow combatants if they were ready. One of the professors warned a student named Vermil not to slow them down. Vermil confidently replied that he wouldn't dream of it. The professor took charge, shouting that his priority was on keeping everyone alive. He explained that his magic would stop the roots from breaking through the ground beneath them and warned everyone to watch for attacks from above. He gave a strict order not to step off the magical protection, stating that anyone who did would be valuing their life very little. He then gave commands to his companions, telling Moxie to focus on restricting the monster's movements and asking if she could control it to some degree. Moxie corrected the professor, reminding him that the root fiend was still a monster, not a simple plant. The professor then asked another individual, Breodin, if he could handle finishing it off. Breodin retorted that their defenses would fall the moment he stopped concentrating. Another voice, belonging to a man named Alan, chimed in with a flippant suggestion for Breodin to do a spin, claiming he would get extra style points if he landed it while killing the fiend. Observing Alan's behavior, someone remarked that while he was a prick, he was at least a capable one. Alan, realizing his previous attack had been ineffective, noted that it had barely even burnt the monster. He decided he needed his sword from his storage and declared he would see how flammable the tree-like creature was, stating he would need more energy if he wanted to do real damage. Alan then decided on a different approach. After executing his new plan, he tauntingly asked the professor how that Alan. The result of Alan's action was so shocking that one of the students gasped, wondering aloud if Alan had just died. It was revealed that Alan had not died but had performed a dangerous maneuver, freezing the monster's hand to its own neck. He complained that his broken sword wouldn't fly straight. Alan realized he probably shouldn't use a vibration technique while standing on the monster, muttering, "Oops." As a result, another professor shouted that the fiend was trying to stomp and break through Braden's protective magic. He expressed frustration that they weren't doing enough damage to kill it quickly. Alan retorted that he was doing more than the others were. He stated he could kill it, but it wouldn't be fast and he might get squished first. Another voice insisted they needed Braden's strength, as he was the only one capable of killing something like this quickly. An observer noted that while Braden acted like he didn't care for the students, he was certainly giving his all to keep them safe. Someone else started to yell that Braden was protecting the kids, but Braden himself cut them off, telling them to shut up and wait. When asked to use a domain, Braden angrily refused, shouting that he wasn't a soldier but a professor. Alan announced that he had an idea. He instructed Moxie and another to keep the fiend off him and then get back on the protected ground. Moxie protested, stating she wasn't his servant. Alan then urged the 2 of them to keep the monster busy for a little longer. Alan prepared for his plan, warning that it was quite literally everything he had. A student watched in horror, addressing Alan as Professor, and telling him that he wasn't supposed to be a hero. The student hoping aloud that Alan hadn't gotten himself killed for them. A student rushed to Professor Alan's side, asking frantically if he was okay after his explosive maneuver. Alan thanked Moxie for catching him as he fell. Another student expressed immense relief, claiming he had never doubted the professor for a second. Moxie, however, was analytical, pointing out that the explosion had contained far more power than Alan's runes should have been capable of generating on their own. Moxie pressed him for an explanation on how he achieved such a powerful blast. Alan gave a simple, almost flippant answer about smoke in an enclosed space, stating that explosions cause expansion. He dryly referred to the entire event as an anti-smoking advertisement. The soldier, Gavin, admitted it was quite impressive for someone of rank 2, but then questioned if Alan was playing some sort of game, asking why he acted so incompetent when he was clearly capable of such power. Before Alan could answer, another student chimed in, saying he would have done it just to see the shocked look on Gavin's face. The students then excitedly demanded to know when he would teach them how to perform such a feat, accusing him of holding out on them. Jess, Gavin's partner, directly asked if Alan had any formal soldier training, stating that she had been watching and he fought just like one. Moxie bluntly translated Jess's observation, stating that fighting like a soldier meant he was suicidal. Alan denied that it was intentional. Jess then made him an offer, telling him to let her know if he ever considered a career change. Another professor immediately intervened, telling Jess to back off and identifying Alan as a Linwick, one of their own. Jess clarified that he wasn't from the main branch of the family, and the other professor confirmed this. Gavin remarked that it made more sense, as he had been wondering when noble families started sending their own members into the proverbial meat grinder. The professor then formally thanked Gavin and Jess for their help, admitting there was no way their group could have fought all 3 root fiends at once. He suggested the fiends had probably only attacked because his group woke them in the first place, stating he was just glad no one was hurt. Gavin responded that it was their duty to keep citizens out of fights, and they had instead gotten the professors and students wrapped up in it. Alan quipped that all's well that ends well, and Gavin agreed. The soldier then stated they should be off so as not to hold the group up any longer. As they prepared to leave, Moxie pointedly told Alan that he had never really answered her question about how he created the explosion. Alan repeated his earlier answer about lots of smoke, to which Moxie retorted that it was really unhealthy, especially when it exploded. She clarified that her concern wasn't just about the magic but his actions. She pointed out that he was only a rank 2 but had charged at the powerful root fiend without a second thought, even after hearing Brayden say it was a threat to him. She noted he could have died but didn't even blink. Alan's response was cryptic, stating that death isn't so bad and that it's the centuries of waiting that really suck. He explained that he saw fear as a tool that lets you know your limits but sometimes holds you back. A student interpreted this to mean Alan just understood his limits really well. Alan agreed but also credited his good backup, saying he wouldn't have run in like that if Moxie and the other Alan hadn't been beside him. Moxie countered that she and the other Alan weren't trained to fight. The student, Lee, joked that someone clearly hadn't seen Moxie when she was mad, or when she was trying to convince him she was an ally. He then pointed to the other Alan, stating that despite his big head, he was skating circles around the root fiend. Lee revealed that this Alan was the head of the trick skating club on campus and had shown him a few tricks. He explained that Alan was actually the skating instructor and that he had been in his after-school class for a year, where such tricks were part of the show. Lee concluded that everyone has hobbies, which was why he wanted to know what their professor's hobby was and how he learned to fight like that. Moxie answered for him, stating it was because all he did was fight. She declared that he had no other hobbies and was a soldier in a professor's clothes. Later, Lee told Alan that rooms had been arranged for all of them. He then complimented Alan on his impressive work during the fight, conceding that Alan getting the best of him back in the garden might not have just been a fluke. Alan thanked him and said Lee wasn't half bad himself. Lee admitted he wouldn't have been able to do it without Alan's help, or the other Alans, though he liked him less. He confessed that he had nearly gotten squished and that if Lee hadn't saved him, his shield would have done nothing to stop the root fiend's foot. Alan told him not to let it get to him since they had won. Lee remained somber, stating they could have lost and that they only get one chance at these things. He couldn't afford mistakes like that. Alan reluctantly agreed that he was right. Lee then said he had another question. Lee recalled Brayden shouting about his domain being useless and asked what a domain was. He then asked Alan if he knew how to do literally anything other than fight. Alan deflected, asking if Lee really wanted the answer to that. He then seriously explained that domains are the reason for the significant power discrepancy between rank 3 and rank 4, often called the gap. He described a domain as the manifestation of one's runic power around them, which lets them keep other people's magic from getting near unless they can overpower it. Alan continued his explanation, stating that reaching rank 4 also expands one's soul enough to allow for increased longevity. Lee was shocked, asking if one got to live longer at rank 4. Alan confirmed it, dryly noting that old age was one of the few things his guard wasn't saving him from, or else he'd be in a constant loop of dying and waking up. Lee expressed that he really didn't want to deal with that. Alan specified that one gets 150 extra years at rank 4, and even more with every rank after that. He mentioned that the headmaster was rank 6 and was rumored to be over 700 years old. Their conversation was interrupted by the other Alan, who asked if they could get more bread because someone had eaten all of theirs. The other Alan celebrated the idea of longevity, shouting a cheerful goodbye to death and telling its lines to shove it. Lee, however, was doubtful he would ever reach rank 4, explaining that his runes weren't really that well combined. He noted that his kind didn't usually have the liberty of planning things out due to the competition. Alan guessed that was what made the ones who survived so strong. He then admitted he was having difficulties as well, finding it tough to come up with a strategy to rank up and noting that guesswork was a terrible idea when one's entire future rides on it. He asked Lee if his family didn't provide him with rune combinations. The other Alan suddenly interjected, claiming he could fix that problem for both of them. He boasted that he could fix everything, and all it would cost was his greatest secret. In the morning, a student named Torin asked if the group was setting off soon. Professor Alan replied that they would in a bit, as he was running low on supplies and wanted to restock. He explained that the innkeeper had sent someone to get what he asked for, so he planned to hang around a little. Torin saw it as a good opportunity to explore the town, noting he hadn't been outside of Arbitage in a while and thought there might be something interesting. Another student derisively called the town a rundown hole. Alan told Torin to help himself but warned him not to wander for too long, stating they would leave in an hour. Torin found himself at a market, surprised that it was incredible despite Moxie having described it as only a small market. As he looked around, a vendor greeted him, claiming he had spotted Torin's Arbitage uniform in the crowd and knew he would be interested. The vendor offered runes for 10 gold each, claiming it was a great deal unavailable anywhere else. Torin examined a Greater Fire rune, noting it looked pretty different from the one in Vermil's book. Suddenly, another vendor angrily told the first to get his hands off his customer, insisting the student was just about to buy some runes. Professor Allen then arrived, firmly telling Torin to never buy runes from a random market vendor. Torin replied that he could have just told him that, then mentioned the runes looked different from ones he'd seen. Allen stated that was because they were bad forgeries. Allen explained that noble houses keep rune prices high by flooding the market with fakes or by skimping on the energy needed to imbue the rune, leaving buyers with a pretty picture that lacks enough energy to learn from. He described the rune market as heavily regulated through policies and threats, advising to only buy from approved vendors unless one really knew what they were doing. When Torin asked if the vendor was knowingly trying to scam them, Allen said maybe, but he probably just picked up his stock from someone else down a chain. Torin found that unfortunate, then asked why the noble houses were so dead set on keeping runes restricted, sensing it went beyond just maintaining power. Allen agreed there were lots of reasons, with power being the biggest but fear also playing a part. When asked to elaborate, he revealed that nobody in the empire was higher than rank 6. He explained that the Arbalest Empire was the site of an enormous war many years ago where mage casualties were too high for either side to continue, leading to an unsustainable conflict and a subsequent truce. After that, anyone rank 7 or higher just... Allen continued explaining that some people think the existence of rank 7s is just a story, with no reliable record of them ever existing, though some noble family could be hiding it. When Torin asked what that had to do with controlling rune markets, Allen clarified that the noble houses are worried someone else will reach rank 7 before them. Every family is desperately trying to climb the ranks, but combinations get incredibly complicated at higher levels. If enough people could experiment with runes, eventually someone might figure out the path to rank 7, and the noble houses don't want that. Torin wondered why they didn't just combine a bunch of the same kind of rune to hit rank 7, thinking it seemed easy. Allen sharply informed him that it wasn't pretty, especially at higher ranks, explaining that runes need balance. Different types exert pressure on each other, but ones of the same type don't. Too much of one type with nothing to hold it back, and you wouldn't survive the experience. Torin understood, comparing it to how his other runes had pushed back on Sunder and let him use its power, stating that explained a lot. Later, Allen was seen concentrating intensely. When Moxie asked what he was doing, he grunted that he was trying body imbuement. Moxie expressed surprise it had taken him this long, having expected him to try it the day she told him about it, and asked if he was actually getting better at waiting. Allen explained that Moxie had told him on their walk that body imbuments could be removed pretty easily, which got him thinking. He recalled that the Hellraver was only rank 2, same as he was now, but it had much greater control over the combustion rune, always having a ring of fire around it, the rune's active ability. He noted that was something the Hellraver would have to do intentionally. Allen pointed out that the ring was still there even while the monster was sleeping, and he wondered why. He theorized that some of it was likely because it was a monster and naturally closer with its runes, but if he could also get closer with the combustion rune, it would be a significant boost in strength. When Moxie said she wasn't following, Allen asked what the one thing of his was that stuck around after death. Moxie quipped it was his impatience, then seriously guessed his soul, asking if that could even be imbued. Allen replied there was only one way to find out. Moxie warned him to be careful. Allen reasoned that there could only be one of any master rune at a time, so if he tried to imbue it slowly, he would technically be splitting it. He concluded he had to imbue the whole thing at once. It was all or nothing. He hoped he was right about his theory, knowing that if he was wrong, he might permanently damage himself. But he couldn't think of anything else the Hellraver could have been doing, so he believed this had to be right. Allen focused, knowing he needed the right intent when he imbued the rune, or he would end up with his own ring of fire constantly following him around. His plan was to limit the amount of the combustion rune's power he was draining, leaving the rest in his soul, so he could regulate it. He reminded himself to remember his intent for the power to go into his lungs and leave through his breath. Allen mentally commanded the power to let his breath control it, to keep the amount of energy that passively flowed out low so it wouldn't have enough to combust. He wanted only enough flowing to establish access to the reservoir, leaving the rest in the soul. Allen exclaimed that it had worked, confirming his theory that one could imbue their soul. He noted this wasn't something anyone would do with a rune they would grow out of, but for a master rune it was viable. Moxie acknowledged that he might have stumbled onto something significant and suggested they find a snuffler so she could show him more. With Moxie asking Allen if he was ready, Allen confirmed he was and announced that he had figured out how the Hellraver did everything. Allen explained that the flow of the Hellraver's breath was what mattered, as that was what gave it such easy control over everything, including the air. He detailed that it used fire runes alongside combustion and drew in embers from its ring of fire to use as fuel. However, he concluded that he didn't need a ring of fire himself. He described his new technique. Pyroclastic resonance could vibrate things together until they burned, and then he could combust that into smoke. Moxie found it interesting but pointed out a problem, asking how he avoided burning himself in the process since he wasn't fireproof. Allen revealed that combustion's passive ability was the most important part, as it allowed him to render the air next to his skin inert so it couldn't burn. He continued his explanation, stating he used pyroclastic resonance, which he had imbued his lungs with, to condense the flame into a thin stream that kept the heat trapped. Moxie connected this to why he had been coughing so much when she found him. This control allowed him to use the vibration of his breath to control the ash in his lungs and also keep them from getting burned. Alan concluded that so long as he had something to burn, he had a weapon. More importantly, he now had an emergency move. If he was ever against a really strong opponent, his own body burned just as well as anything else. Moxie admitted that was pretty damn cool, comparing him to the Hellraver but slightly less fat. She asked if he was going to test it out more, joking that she wouldn't mind getting a few cooked meals. Alan, however, was thinking ahead, theorizing that if he could condense this energy and use it in his body rather than just in his breath, he might be about to get a whole lot stronger. Moxie eagerly asked what he was waiting for. Alan said not yet, explaining that it would need fine-tuning and he didn't want to blow a limb off by accident and die while they were traveling. He stated it would have to wait until his death wouldn't matter. Moxie questioned why dying would matter at all. Alan then realized he had never actually told Lee that he couldn't use magic for a while after dying. He quickly covered by saying that recovering from dying isn't easy, and he just needed his full attention while they were out here. Moxie, seemingly accepting this, asked if they could go cook monsters then. The scene shifted to a training session. A professor announced another great lesson that morning and told everyone they were learning quickly, singling out a student named Isabel for particular praise. An observer noted that Isabel improved so much between every class, as if she had fought dozens more snufflers than other students like Todd or Emily. Later, Todd was approached by another student who asked about the body imbuements on his eyes, calling them impressive but questioning if he knew what he was doing since he hadn't known how to do body imbuements yet. Todd replied that it was honestly a bit of a mistake. He had just envisioned the rune overlaid on his eyes and had since properly imbued them to rectify the issues that method could cause. He strongly advised against trying to replicate it, calling it probably dangerous and stating he just got lucky it worked. The questioning student noted to themselves that Todd's response was really fast and delivered in a flat tone, as if rehearsed. They decided now was probably not the time to push the matter since they were close to the others and it was obviously a touchy subject. Out loud, they told Todd they got it and figured it was worth asking, saying there was no need to worry about it then. In a different setting, someone announced that had arrived, just in time for Vermil to return home in a few days. They expressed no doubt that their reunion would be a joyous one. Alan assessed his current situation, noting he only had 2 runes in his soul pyroclastic resonance and a rank 1 greater wind rune. He identified an imperfection in the combination that created pyroclastic resonance, which was made of 3 vibration, 2 wind, and 2 ash runes. He theorized that replacing one of the ash runes with a wind rune would be the best move, reasoning that the ash was just being moved around by wind anyway. However, he recognized the problems. If he just swapped the greater wind rune in, he would lose the ability to use his flying sword. He formulated a plan, realizing he first had to imbue a copy of the wind rune in his grimoire so he could replace it later. He acknowledged that making a copy would cause the rune to lose a lot of its energy, but he considered that fine since finding monsters to kill and refill it wasn't that hard. To be safe, he decided he should also imbue a copy of pyroclastic resonance. Not wanting to mess up and accidentally lose his rune by sundering it, he planned to get by with imbuing the bare minimum amount of its energy. He recalled Moxie's warning that higher quality catch paper was needed for rank 2 runes and wondered if Vermil's book was made of the good stuff, mentally preparing to waste a lot of power if it was not. Upon attempting the copy, he discovered the book was not made of high quality catch paper. He urgently realized he needed to move fast before the rune burned itself away and focused on imbuing a copy of his wind rune. He then called upon the Sunder rune, hoping his plan would work. His concentration was broken as someone announced that they had found the group. Alan successfully gathered all 7 components of the rune. His next steps were to remove one of the ash runes, replace it with the wind rune, and then recombine them. He succeeded in forming a perfect new combination. His immediate thought was that he needed to get back to camp. The scene then shifted to the camp where a professor was rousing everyone, telling them it was time to get a move on and that there would be no training this morning. The professor informed the group they were entering the last leg of their journey, a place called the Deadlands. He described it as a more dangerous area but assured them that if they kept a good pace, they should be out of it by nightfall. A student asked how it was more dangerous, wondering if it meant more monsters or worse monsters. The professor confirmed it was worse monsters. Another student, Alan, confidently stated he could handle himself and asked not to be grouped in with the rest. The professor acknowledged Alan's abilities but reminded him that the root fiend was his first real fight in years, adding that their family sent him to Arbitage because of his inspired research, not his spry limbs. He told Alan to be happy with that and that nobody should try to be something they aren't. The professor then urged everyone to get moving or he would leave them behind. Alan, to himself, reflected that he shouldn't make a habit of sundering his runes, noting that having to re-imbue his lungs with pyroclastic resonance in the heat was brutal. Fortunately, he hadn't suffered much soul damage from splitting the rune, probably because he had undone the combination rather than completely removing all its components. As they traveled, a student noticed Professor Braden was missing and asked if anyone had seen him before shouting his name. Suddenly, a warning cry rang out that they were under attack. A student asked if it was another root fiend, but another corrected them, stating root fiends couldn't survive in the dry environment. A student then sarcastically asked Alan with his heat vision if he shouldn't be the one telling them what it was. A student began to cast a spell to make vines, announcing he was going to climb to get a better view. The group watched in horror as a giant worm emerged from the sand. A student asked in disbelief if the worm had just eaten Braden. A student named Edward cried out, asking why a monstrous worm was coming after them. A professor instructed Edward to stay behind him for protection. Alan attempted an attack that was ineffective. The professor sharply asked him what that was supposed to be and told him to take the situation seriously. Alan protested that he wasn't ready. Another student desperately asked where Professor Braden was. The professor yelled for everyone to focus on not getting killed. Alan assessed the situation internally, realizing he didn't have nearly enough smoke to replicate what he did to the root fiend. He thought that if he were alone, fighting and dying wouldn't be an issue, but with others there, the stakes were much higher. Professor Braden suddenly emerged from the worm, covered in viscera. A student exclaimed in disgust and then relief, saying they thought he had died. Braden defiantly stated he wasn't killed that easily. He explained that the creature, a pale worm, had caught him by surprise, but the easiest way to kill it was to stab its heart. Once he was inside it and realized what had happened, Braden continued his explanation, stating he just kept going deeper until he found what he was looking for, the heart. He then asked if there were any injuries, expressing his hope that the worm would be too preoccupied with him to put up a real fight against the students. Another observer noted that the worm wasn't even trying to attack them. It was just thrashing around trying to get rid of Braden, which made them wonder just how strong he really was. A student confirmed no one was hurt, though one was upset about being covered in gunk and refused an offer of help to be cleaned off. Braden expressed he was glad to hear everyone was safe. The scene shifted with it into the belly of the beast, and several days later, the group was now a day's walk from the Linwick estate. Alan noticed Moxie seemed troubled and asked her if something was wrong. Moxie revealed that this was as far as she and another student, Emily, would be going. Moxie explained her reasoning, stating that even if Alan wasn't half bad for a Tauren, it wasn't a good idea for either of them to show up on Linwick property, as nothing good would come of it. When asked where they were going instead, Moxie said they would train for the survival exam, noting the trip was good practice but there was no such thing as being too prepared. A student expressed concern about them traveling alone, calling it dangerous. Another student, Todd, expressed jealousy that the others would get to sleep in a bed soon. The professor, Braden, clarified that how long they stayed at the estate depended on how long it took to fully clear Vermil's name. A student expressed skepticism that Vermil could have taken out the Hellraver, noting he was just a rank 1 at the time. Braden defended the story, and Alan noted that his lie actually sounded somewhat believable and that he was getting better at it. A student asked if it wouldn't take long to clear Vermil's name. Braden confirmed it would only take a week or 2 at most, after which he would herd them all back to Arbitage. They arranged to meet back at the same spot. Moxie agreed to the plan but warned she wouldn't wait if they were late. Braden claimed he was never late, unlike some people, though he admitted he hadn't been late in a while, like a few days. Moxie told him to keep that up, especially if meeting with anyone important. She then said a heartfelt goodbye to Vermil's Alan, telling him to please be safe. Alan returned the sentiment. Another student wished everyone good luck. After they parted ways, Alan reflected internally that he knew it was for the best, but losing one of the few friends he had still hurt, especially now. The group then arrived at the Linwick estate. A student was awestruck by its size, expecting a mansion or fortress but finding a veritable city. Alan's internal monologue revealed that everything he had been through since arriving in the Arbalest Empire had been, at least in part, due to his father, the man he was just a short walk away from meeting. Braden asked the group if everyone was ready to proceed. Alan's final internal thought was a simple, "I already know." Professor Braden announced to the group that their journey had come to an end. He stated it had been a pleasure traveling with everyone, and a student returned the sentiment, saying it had been a pleasure traveling with him as well. Braden then stated that he and a student named Edward had business to attend to, and would not be joining them on the journey back to Arbitage. He then addressed a servant, instructing him to take the 3 other students to his guest house, as he and Vermil had an appointment with their father. The servant acknowledged the order. Alan, as Vermil, reassured the students that it would be okay and he would meet back up with them as soon as he could. As the servant asked them to follow, Alan asked one of the students, Lee, to hold on for a second. He handed Lee his bags, saying he didn't want to have to carry them around. Alan told Lee to put them somewhere safe and out of the way. As they walked through the estate, a guard recognized Alan as Vermil Linwick and expressed surprise at his return, asking how long it had been since he'd been home, 2 years or 3. Braden started to say it was time to talk, but Alan cut him off, saying it was fine. The guard, named Hanlon, asked Vermil how he had been. Alan gave a vague answer about life having its ups and downs. Hanlon shared that he had been stationed in the Redden Marsh for a few months last year, which didn't sound bad until a dozen bloodflies were trying to jump up your ass. A student quickly said he was sorry, he asked. The scene then shifted to a flashback titled, Episode 4070 Into the Belly of the Beast, where Alan, in a previous conversation, asked Hanlon if he could do him a favor because he was a bit worried about stepping on someone's toes. He asked if anything had changed a lot since he was last there. Hanlon confirmed that things were a bit restless at the moment, with rumors that another war might break out. When asked if it was against the Taurens, Hanlon said no, that this one was internal, but stressed it was all just rumor. Alan pressed for specifics and Braden told them both to keep their voices down. Hanlon apologized and then revealed that all the rumors centered around a man named Dayton, who had just returned from a 3-year excursion. Hanlon explained that Dayton didn't come back quietly. He had reached rank 5 and was no longer content with the social hierarchy or the family's place in the empire. He wanted the Linwicks to take a more active role and had publicly defied the head of the family several times. Hanlon noted that wasn't hard because the man was barely ever around. The worst part, he said, was that people were starting to follow Dayton, with some saying he was the change the family needed and would bring them into a new era. Hanlon clarified that he wasn't saying Dayton would win if he started a rebellion, as there was no way he'd defeat the current head. However, he described Dayton as ruthless, a man who grew up with everything handed to him by his parents, runes, resources, reputation, and now thought the world owed him the rest. In the present, Alan simply thanked Hanlon for the information. Braden then asked Alan if he was ready to see their father. Alan's internal monologue noted that it had been so long since he'd heard something, but it was cut off. Braden repeated his question asking if Alan was ready, and reminded him that he knew how their father was. Alan responded rhetorically asking if they were ever ready. Braden told him to just fill him in on the events, describing their father as possibly even more paranoid than Alan but that he would listen. Braden offered to call for him if it would help, though he doubted their father would start caring about what he had to say now. Alan thanked him, saying he had already helped a lot, and started to say something more, but Braden cut him off, telling him not to make it weird. Braden urged Alan to just go down and talk to him already, noting that he was just waiting down the stairs. Alan steeled himself, thinking it was time to go back to lesson number 1. Alan facing his father, who stated they had much to discuss, and Alan, posing as Vermil, entered a secure room and asked his father if it was safe to speak there. His father, Damien Linwick, assured him that there was no safer place in the Empire from prying ears and eyes, mentioning he had added additional protection since Vermil was last there. Alan noted internally that Damien had every surface of the room imbued. Damien confirmed this but hinted that some protections must be kept close to the heart, as a surprise isn't a surprise if you share it. Alan outwardly agreed with his father's sentiment. Internally, he strategized on how to approach the conversation, deciding that pretending to be the old Vermil wouldn't work if Damien was as paranoid as Braden said. He concluded he needed a completely different approach where he wasn't playing defense. He then directly asked his father what he thought. Damien's expression darkened, and he accused Alan of daring to play games with him. Alan dropped the act and made his bet. He accused Damien of being the one who dared to play games, reminding him that he had sent his son to summon a demon, and that the price was paid in the blood of his lineage. He stated that no father who cared about their son would use them as a tool for such a purpose, and from the look in Damien's eyes, he could tell he only cared about himself. Alan then delivered the truth: Vermil was dead, and Damien had killed him. Alan declared that he was the blade used to do it. He revealed that Damien had sought his attention through the summoning. He admitted he wasn't planning to follow up but had grown bored. He claimed to have killed the pathetic monkey in the forest for sport, but found the fight unfulfilling. He warned Damien that he hoped he had something interesting to say to keep his attention because he was losing his patience. Damien, recovering from the shock, questioned why he should trust a word from a demon's mouth, especially one who admitted there were no constraints on him. He stated the summoning had gone awry, his son was dead, and now a demon puppeted his body. He demanded to know how he could be sure this demon didn't simply seek his head. Damien threatened to purge the demon on the spot. Alan, completely unfazed, invited him to feel free, stating he cared not for Vermil's body as it was too weak to contain him. He boasted that he had hundreds of such Xanamove, and that killing this form would be no more consequential than trimming his hair. He challenged Damien's assumption that he was there to serve him, stating Vermil had failed and if Damien wanted his aid, he would have to treat with him directly. When Damien retorted that only a fool treats with demons, and a wiser man has someone else do it, Alan agreed but pointed out that a truly wise man would have chosen someone outside their family, alluding to the damage he could now do. Alan cut through the posturing and revealed his key piece of information: there was another man who treats with demons, one stronger than them. He countered Damien's claim that his son failed, calling it a poor one. The conversation shifted slightly as Damien offered food and drink, which Alan declined, stating they had lost their appeal and that he preferred to feed off killing, finding meals a waste of time. Damien noted they were of different mindsets. Damien elaborated, saying he found meals to be moments where great power could be seized, as men with full stomachs were most willing to give him what he wished. However, he conceded that most of what he wanted could be gained by killing those men, full stomachs or not. He then questioned the demon's cunning, asking if one needed to be cunning to squash an ant. He implied that Alan was an ant to him and asked what he could possibly do to inconvenience him. Alan stated he could kill him. Damien dismissed this, repeating that it would be like cutting his hair. Alan called this a likely story, noting everyone wants others to believe them immortal, but stated that while Damien was a powerful demon, he was not an archdemon. He left the statement hanging. Alan stated that their relationship would be one of give and take. Damien asked what the demon would give in return, since his life wasn't his to give. Alan boasted that his life was his to give and told Damien to prove he was what he said he was before making such boasts. Agreeing to this, Alan instructed Damien to send Brayden for his other body, which had taken the form of a woman named Lee. He declared that when she arrived, all would be proven. Later, Brayden returned with Lee. Alan, in Vermil's body, addressed Lee, telling her it was time to see how good she was at thinking on her feet. He then instructed her to revert to their current form. Damien dismissed Brayden, who left with a respectful, "Yes, father." Lee then underwent a transformation. Damien remained skeptical, stating there were many ways to replicate a body and that this was hardly proof. Alan, now in his true demonic form which matched Lee's transformed state, retorted that the quality of the copy wasn't the question, but the validity of the claim. He said he thought Damien might say that and warned him there would be a time he regretted this decision. When Damien asked what he was blathering about, Alan requested a dagger from Damien's own collection to eliminate any trickery, asking if this would suffice for his show. Ian Linwick noted that the floor had imbuements to help clean the blood away. He observed the body before him and conceded that if it was a copy of a corpse, it was a good one. He identified the being as a face-stealer. He further reasoned that a real corpse would have deformed after dying. He then instructed the demon to wait outside the room, stating they would speak again once its proof had arrived. In a private moment, he revealed that it had taken him years to build a resistance to that poisoned wine. Alone. Damien questioned whether he still needed to drink the antidote, but decided he couldn't take the risk. He explained that the poison targeted the soul, not the flesh, and should be devastating to anything that had stolen the body of another. He was baffled that Vermil hadn't so much as flinched. He expressed relief at not having to buy the poison again due to its exorbitant cost of 10,000 gold per bottle, but then considered he might run into another person he suspected of possession. He reaffirmed his decision not to take the risk and ordered another bottle to be purchased by tomorrow. He concluded that the boy was definitely dead with no traces remaining, but noted that he had served his purpose. He mused that it remained to be seen what exactly Vermil had brought to his doorstep. He reasoned that if it were mere possession, the poison would have ripped the monster free, meaning the creature was truly a part of that body. While a powerful demon was the most likely conclusion, he doubted it was an archdemon, estimating its strength at around rank 4. He analyzed the demon's behavior as arrogant but not overly so, noting it held its ground when challenged but didn't push back, indicating it wasn't looking for a fight. He believed it viewed him as a threat, but was still hungry or bored enough to listen. He resolved to perform more tests but was convinced it was a demon. He praised his dead son's work. He predicted the demon would return and make a show of asking for payment for its death, and he planned to put up mediocre resistance before giving in to determine its true nature. He was certain the demon was hiding something. He was confident it was only a matter of time until he discovered what that secret was. Alan, back in his own body, reflected that he really shouldn't make a habit of killing himself. He and Lee arrived at the guest house and he remarked that this was the place they were staying. He found it not half bad but immediately noticed that the other students, Todd and Isabel, were not there as they should be. He grew concerned, wondering what they were getting up to. He found Lee, who was shocked to see him in his true form, asking if she was dreaming and why there were two of him. Alan told her he would explain later, alluding to their shared secret. When she pressed to be told right there in their home, he insisted that nowhere was safe and you never know. He then urgently asked her to come into his father's study with him for a bit and then go find the missing students. He explained that he had a bad feeling they were about to do something stupid, noting wryly that they were his students after all. A servant informed him that his father knew he was here and told him not to keep him waiting. Alan replied that he'd never dream of it. Alan entered the study and greeted his father, suggesting they continue where they left off. Damien conceded that the demon had made its point and said he was convinced of its nature. He gestured to the cut hair on the floor and asked if the demon planned to keep it as a souvenir or if it wanted the hair back, sarcastically telling it to help itself. He then remarked it would be a shame to waste a good body. With the meeting apparently concluded, Damien dismissed the demon, telling it may leave now. As Alan left, Damien asked if something was wrong, noting that its second body couldn't stay and chat. Alan retorted that his time was in high demand and that Damien was not the only one weaving a web. The scene then cut to the missing student, Isabel, who was being cautioned by someone that her plan wasn't a good idea. Isabel insisted she wasn't just letting something go but taking calculated risks. The other person argued there was no harm in waiting a bit longer. Isabel became frustrated, exclaiming that was the problem. She had done nothing for years and had to do something. The other person countered that they were making progress and getting stronger. The other person told Isabel to look at them, joking that things were off when they were the voice of reason. They acknowledged it was difficult to be so close to their goal but urged caution. Their conversation was interrupted by a guard, who demanded to know what they had there. He accused them of scoping the area out for entirely too long and called them thieves. He declared they would both be coming with him, as Lord Dayton would want to deal with them personally. A guard confronted two students, Todd and Isabel, accusing them of scoping out the area for too long and calling them thieves. He declared they would both be coming with him so that Lord Dayton could deal with them personally. In a separate scene, the demon, having returned to Damien's study, stated that it was time to discuss the matter of its payment, asserting that information was not free. Damien questioned why he should pay for something the demon did to itself, pointing out that he didn't force it to do anything, it had chosen to cut its own throat. The demon countered that words were just as powerful as a blade. It argued that the information it was asking for cost Damien little to give, and he would lose nothing by providing it. The demon noted that it had lost much with its death, so they would be even, and asked if that wasn't fair. The demon threatened to collect its payment in blood if necessary, noting that while Damien was well defended, it had many bodies and the other Linwicks were not nearly as safe. Damien retorted that threatening his family would gain it nothing, as he cared nothing for those outside of his branch. The demon admitted it had suspicions that the attention such acts would draw would be more problematic for Damien than the actual deaths. Damien conceded the point, and the demon asked if they had a deal. Demon agreed to give the demon some of the information it sought, but stated he would not reveal all of their rune combinations, as many were too valuable for the services rendered thus far. The demon accepted this. When asked how it would receive the information, Damien said he would arrange for someone to meet with it. In the meantime, he would gather his resources for their true discussion. He stated that Braden would show it to a room in the mansion where it could stay. The demon stated it would maintain its reputation as the fool that Vermil had been, and that it benefited them both to keep relations between them strained in the eyes of outsiders. Damien agreed. He then told the demon it would return to its students. He then tested the demon, asking if the students were also clones. The demon, internally noting this was a test to see how much it cared, responded carefully by asking if it would tell him if they were. Damien simply replied that he could always find out, implying a threat. The scene shifted to where Todd and Isabel were being held. A guard reported that a servant had seen suspicious people outside Dayton Linwick's residence and accused them of being the culprits. Isabel defended them, saying they were just sitting and looking around, but were leaving now. She challenged the guard, noting he had Dayton's crest on his armor and wasn't a guard for the whole Linwick estate, just a lapdog for Dayton. Isabel pointed out they weren't on Dayton's property, so the guard had no authority. Todd urged her that they should go. At that moment, Alan, posing as Vermil, arrived and stated he had found his wayward students. The guard demanded to know who Alan was. He introduced himself as Magus Vermil under his father's branch. He explained the students had slipped away while he was in a talk and he had to change clothes, hoping they hadn't gotten into much trouble. The guard insisted the students would be coming with him to report back to Dayton, as a servant had mentioned they were scoping the area out. Alan questioned what scoping the area out meant, observing that they were just standing on a public walking path and asking if that wasn't allowed. The guard reiterated that it didn't matter and they were coming with him. Alan challenged this, asking if they really were. Internally, Damien's voice noted that the children served roles that would further his ambitions. Alan, channeling his father's cold demeanor, asked the guard if he was willing to pay the cost of cutting their threads short for the sake of pointless curiosity. The guard conceded this was a fair argument. Alan then demanded that in return the guard avoid meddling in his affairs, stating that if such rules could be set, it was only fair he could as well. The guard, now treating Alan with more respect, asked what name the demon went by. Alan caught off guard internally because Lee didn't have a name, said he hadn't needed one thus far. The guard suggested Spider would be apt since it seemed to enjoy spinning webs. Alan accepted the name. Before parting, Alan had one more matter to address. He told the guard that Braden knew nothing of their arrangement and that it would be prudent to keep it that way. He said Braden would take him to his abode with the students. He concluded that they would speak again soon and that he was very much looking forward to seeing what the demon could do for him.